What if everything you believed your whole life was suddenly challenged by an undeniable encounter? Rachel Cohen, a devout Jewish woman, never questioned her faith until one desperate prayer changed everything. In the stillness of the night, she asked God a simple yet life-altering question: was Jesus truly your son? The answer came in a way she never expected, through fire, an unseen presence, and a voice she had never spoken before. This is her shocking, supernatural testimony. Rachel Cohen sat at the breakfast table, watching the morning sunlight filter through the kitchen window. To anyone looking in from the outside, her life seemed perfect. She was married to David, a successful stockbroker, and they lived in an upscale neighborhood just outside of New York City. They had 3 beautiful children, a spacious home, and financial security, everything they had ever dreamed of. And yet, deep inside, Rachel felt an unexplainable emptiness. She couldn't put it into words, but despite all their blessings, something was missing. David, on the other hand, never questioned anything. He was a proud Orthodox Jew, devoted to his faith, his career, and his family. He attended synagogue regularly, observed the traditions, and expected the same from Rachel and their children. Though Rachel had grown up in a more relaxed conservative Jewish household, she had embraced David's Orthodox ways when they married. She respected his commitment but didn't share his deep conviction. To her, religion was more about tradition than a personal connection with God. Life went on as usual until Ethan, David's younger brother, returned from California after a year away. Ethan had always been the free-spirited one in the family, a thinker and a seeker, but nothing could have prepared them for the shocking revelation he brought home. At a family gathering, Ethan stood up after dinner and cleared his throat. "I have something important to share," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Rachel noticed David shift uncomfortably in his seat. The room fell silent as Ethan took a deep breath. "I've found the truth," he continued. "I've come to believe that Jesus, Yeshua, is the Messiah." The reaction was immediate. David's mother gasped, his father's face darkened with anger, and the entire family erupted in disbelief. David shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Are you out of your mind?" he thundered. Ethan remained calm. "David, I know this is hard to hear, but—" David didn't let him finish. In an act of sheer disgust, he spat on the floor. "You are no longer Jewish," he said coldly. "You've betrayed everything we stand for." Rachel sat frozen, her heart pounding. The intensity in the room was suffocating. David stormed out, grabbing their 2 sons by the hand. Their daughter, still too young to understand, stayed by Rachel's side. Ethan's parents left without another word. Rachel glanced at Ethan, who looked heartbroken but resolute. Against all reason, she felt a wave of sympathy for him. She didn't believe what he was saying, but she could see he did, and that intrigued her. Everyone had rejected him outright, but Rachel, for reasons she couldn't explain, stayed behind. "I don't understand why you're doing this, Ethan," she said softly. "You know what this means for you, for all of us." "I do," Ethan replied. "But Rachel, I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I only ask that you seek the truth for yourself." Rachel shook her head. "I'm not curious, Ethan." "You don't have to be," he said gently, "but someday, you might have a question you can't answer. And when that day comes, just remember, God is always listening." Rachel didn't respond. She didn't know it yet, but that conversation would change her life forever. Days passed, then weeks. The tension from Ethan's revelation still lingered in the Cohen household like an unwelcome guest. David refused to speak his brother's name, and their in-laws treated the subject as if it never happened. Rachel, too, had tried to move on, but something about that night gnawed at her. She told herself it was just concern for Ethan, that he had thrown his life away for a delusion. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. It wasn't what Ethan had said that haunted her, it was how he had said it. He had been so sure, so at peace. But she pushed it aside. Then, one evening, as she was clearing the dinner table, her 6-year-old son, Noah, looked up at her with wide, innocent eyes and asked, "Mom, does God really exist?" Rachel froze, the plate in her hand hovering over the sink. The question caught her completely off guard. She had expected something simple, like asking for another bedtime story or a glass of water, not this. She forced a smile. "Of course, sweetheart. We pray to him, don't we?" Noah frowned. "But how do you know he's real? Have you ever heard him talk to you?" Rachel's heart pounded. She should have had an answer, But suddenly, she wasn't sure what to say. "Who told you to ask that?" she asked, trying to keep her voice even. "No one," he said with a small shrug. "I just wanted to know." Rachel swallowed hard. She had spent her whole life believing in Judaism, in tradition, in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but when faced with the simplest of questions, she realized she didn't actually know. "Go wash up for bed," she told him, hoping he would forget the conversation. But Rachel couldn't forget. That night, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling. David was asleep beside her, his breathing slow and steady, but she couldn't relax. What kind of mother doesn't know how to answer her child's question about God? For years, she had followed Jewish customs without questioning them. She had lit the Shabbat candles, fasted on Yom Kippur, celebrated Passover. But did she believe? The thought unsettled her. Ethan's words echoed in her mind. "If you really want to know the truth, ask God yourself." Rachel exhaled sharply. It was a ridiculous idea. What was she expecting? That God would suddenly appear in her room and answer her? And yet, an unshakable curiosity stirred within her. She turned onto her side, watching the dim glow of the streetlight filter through the window. Then, for the first time in her life, she prayed a prayer she actually meant. "God, if you're real, if you can hear me, then I need to know the truth." She hesitated, then forced herself to say the next part. "And if Jesus is truly your son, then show me a sign." A chill ran down her spine the moment the words left her lips. She waited, her pulse thudding in her ears. The room was silent except for David's soft breathing. Nothing happened. Rachel felt foolish. Of course, nothing happened. With a frustrated sigh, she turned onto her back and closed her eyes. Maybe she was just overtired. Maybe this was all because of Ethan planting doubts in her mind. Yes, that had to be it. Rachel let out a slow breath and decided she would never pray that prayer again. She had asked. There was no answer. That was all she needed to know. Or so she thought. Rachel awoke with a start. At first, she wasn't sure what had disturbed her. The room was still and dark, the quiet hum of the city beyond their window the only sound. David was beside her, fast asleep, his back turned toward her. But something felt wrong. Her body was heavy, almost as if an invisible force was pressing her into the mattress. She tried to move, to shift her arm, but it wouldn't budge. Panic seized her. She opened her mouth to call David's name, but no sound came out. Rachel's pulse pounded. Was she dreaming? Was this sleep paralysis? But something about this felt too real, too intense. The air in the room had changed. It was thick, electric, charged with something unseen yet undeniably present. Then she saw it. A glow. At first, it was just a faint flicker at the edge of her vision, near the window. But within seconds, it grew brighter, hotter, until Rachel realized what she was looking at. Fire. It wasn't like ordinary fire. Wild, destructive, consuming. This fire burned without smoke, without heat. It danced along the edges of the window frame, golden tongues flickering in perfect rhythm, moving with an intelligence of their own. Rachel's breath came in shallow gasps. Was she hallucinating? But before she could make sense of it, the flames expanded. They crept up the walls, tracing the entire perimeter of the ceiling until the entire room was glowing, bathed in a surreal, otherworldly light. Yet nothing burned. The walls, the curtains, the furniture, it all remained untouched. Then, the pressure on her body intensified. A force unlike anything she had ever felt pressed down on her head, spreading through her entire body. It wasn't painful, but it was overwhelming, as though something was moving through her, inside her. Rachel's mind screamed for an explanation, but deep down, she already knew. This was God. This was the presence she had doubted, the very existence she had questioned just hours before. And now, it was here, in her bedroom, consuming every fiber of her being. Her chest tightened, her body trembled, and then, her mouth opened. She didn't try to speak. In fact, she was certain she wasn't speaking. Yet words began pouring from her lips, flowing like a river, uncontrollable and unstoppable. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Rachel's eyes widened in terror. She didn't know this prayer. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Tears streamed down her face. She had never memorized these words, never spoken them before in her life, yet they spilled from her mouth as if they had always been inside her. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. Her lips trembled, but the prayer continued. 3 times, her voice recited it in perfect rhythm, and with each repetition, something inside of her broke. She felt it, a cleansing, a purging, a fire inside her soul burning away every doubt, every question, every barrier that had kept her from the truth. God was real. Jesus was his son, and she, Rachel Cohen, a woman who had spent her entire life in Jewish tradition without knowing the God she claimed to follow, had just met him. The pressure on her head slowly lifted. The fire around the room began to withdraw, its golden glow fading into nothingness. The moment it vanished completely, Rachel could move again. She gasped, her body shaking as she pushed herself up in bed, her breath ragged and uneven. Her skin was damp with sweat, her heart hammering against her ribs. She turned toward David, who still lay peacefully asleep, unaware that the very fabric of his wife's reality had just been rewritten. Rachel pressed a trembling hand to her chest, feeling her heart pound beneath her palm. But beneath the shock, beneath the fear, something else stirred within her. Peace. Not the kind that came from a comfortable life, from financial security or tradition. No, this was a peace that ran deeper, richer, more complete than anything she had ever known. Rachel Cohen had just encountered the living God, and nothing would ever be the same again. Rachel lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, still trembling from the encounter. The room was dark and silent again, but she felt different, lighter, like something heavy had been lifted from her soul. She turned to David, watching him sleep peacefully, completely unaware of what had just happened. She had to tell him. Sitting up, she reached out and shook his arm gently. "David," she whispered. He groaned and pulled the blanket over his head. "What?" he muttered groggily. "David, wake up," she urged, her heart pounding. Something happened. With an annoyed sigh, David rolled onto his back and rubbed his eyes. "Rachel, what time is it?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But listen, I need to tell you." Rachel hesitated. How did she even begin to explain what had just happened? That fire had filled their bedroom, that an unseen force had entered her, that words she had never memorized had poured from her mouth like a flood. "I had a vision," she finally said. "No, not just a vision, something more. God. He was here, David. I saw him. I felt him." David frowned, sitting up slightly. "What are you talking about?" Rachel took a deep breath. "I asked God if Jesus was really his son, and he answered me." David was fully awake now, his expression darkening. "Rachel," he said slowly, "tell me you're joking." "I'm not," she said, shaking her head. "It was real, David. I saw fire that didn't burn. I felt something inside me, cleansing me, filling me. And then I started saying the Lord's Prayer. But I never memorized it, David. It just came out of me." David's eyes narrowed. He threw the blanket off and got out of bed. "This is Ethan's fault," he muttered, pacing the room. "This has nothing to do with Ethan," Rachel shot back. "I was just as skeptical as you. But now I know. God answered me, David. Jesus is the Messiah." David whirled around, his face red with anger. "Stop. Just stop," he snapped. Rachel flinched at his tone, but she held her ground. "This is crazy," he continued, his hands shaking. "You sound insane. You think you had some vision? Fine. Maybe you were dreaming. Maybe you were hallucinating. But don't you dare say that Jesus is the Messiah. You're Jewish, Rachel. We don't believe in him." Rachel met his gaze, her voice calm but firm. "David, I'm still Jewish. But I can't deny what happened. I asked, and God showed me the truth." David let out a bitter laugh. "The truth? You had a bad dream, that's all. You've been under stress, thinking about Ethan. Your mind is playing tricks on you." Rachel's heart ached. She had hoped he would at least listen, that he would see the change in her and be curious. But instead, he was furious. "I know what I experienced," she said softly, "and nothing you say will change that." David ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "I can't deal with this right now." He grabbed his phone from the nightstand. "I'm going to bed." "David, please." He didn't respond. He turned off the light and lay down, his back to her. Rachel stared at him for a long moment before closing her eyes. "God, I know you've revealed yourself to me, but please, please open David's heart." The next few days were tense. David barely spoke to Rachel, throwing himself into work and avoiding her as much as possible. But strange things started happening. At the office, one of his longtime clients, a well-known businessman, casually mentioned Jesus in conversation. David stiffened. "What did you say?" The man chuckled. "Oh, just that my faith in Jesus has gotten me through some rough times lately. You know, I never thought I'd believe in him, being Jewish and all," but David didn't hear the rest. His heart was pounding. Later that evening, as he scrolled through TV channels, he accidentally landed on a documentary about the Jewish roots of Christianity. He changed the channel immediately, irritated. Then, the next morning, he stopped at a cafe before work, and the woman at the counter greeted him with a cheerful, "God bless you." David muttered a thanks and walked away, unsettled. No matter where he turned, something about Jesus was being placed in front of him. He told himself it was a coincidence. But how many coincidences could there be? That night, Rachel tried again. "David, you can't tell me you haven't noticed what's happening," she said gently. "People keep bringing up Jesus. You keep hearing his name. Doesn't that make you wonder?" David scoffed. "No. It makes me think I'm being tested." Rachel sighed. Ethan was right. If you really want to know the truth, ask God yourself. David shook his head. "I'm not praying about this." "Why not?" "Because I already know the answer," he snapped. Rachel just smiled. "So did I." David turned away, but her words lingered in his mind. He didn't know it yet, but something was about to happen that would shake his certainty to its core. David had no intention of meeting Samuel Katz. Ethan had called him earlier that week, excitedly telling him about a Jewish man who had once been an atheist, but now passionately believed in Jesus. "David, you need to meet him," Ethan had urged. "He understands our background. He gets it." David scoffed. "I don't need to meet anyone, Ethan. I already told you, I'm not interested." He thought that was the end of it. But fate, or something greater, had other plans. On Friday afternoon, Rachel received a call. The hotel Samuel was supposed to stay at had overbooked, leaving him without a place to stay. Before David could protest, Rachel had already offered their home. That evening, David stood at the door, arms crossed, as Samuel Katz stepped inside. He was nothing like David had imagined. He wasn't wearing a priest's collar or some missionary outfit. He looked like any other Jewish man. A tailored suit, sharp eyes, and an air of quiet confidence. "David," Samuel greeted warmly, extending a hand. David hesitated, then shook it, his grip firm but reluctant. Dinner was uneventful, at least on the surface. Samuel didn't bring up Jesus, and for that, David was relieved. But as the meal wound down, Samuel set his fork down and looked across the table. "David," he said, "I want to read something to you. Something from our scriptures." David shifted in his seat. "Go ahead." Samuel opened a worn, leather-bound Hebrew Bible and began to read. "Who has believed our message? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed." David stiffened. Something about the words sent a chill down his spine. Samuel's voice was steady as he continued, reading all of Isaiah 53. Each verse cut through David like a knife. He had heard this passage before, but had never really listened. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter. David's hands clenched under the table. He knew who this sounded like. It sounded like Jesus. But that couldn't be, could it? Samuel closed the Bible and met David's gaze. "David, who do you think this is describing?" David swallowed hard. His mouth felt dry. I don't know," he lied. Samuel leaned forward. "If I had read this without telling you where it was from, would you have assumed it was the New Testament?" David didn't answer. Because the truth was, yes. His heart pounded. What if I was wrong all along? David couldn't sleep. Hours after Samuel had read Isaiah 53, the words still echoed in his mind. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that something undeniable had just happened. He had spent his whole life believing that Jesus was for the Gentiles, that Judaism and Christianity were separate and incompatible. But now, for the first time, he wasn't so sure, and that terrified him. Slipping out of bed, he walked quietly into the living room. He stood there for a long moment, staring at nothing in particular. Then, taking a deep breath, He did something he hadn't done in years. He prayed, "God, I don't know what to do." His hands clenched into fists. "I've followed you my whole life. I've kept the commandments, honored the traditions. I've done everything I was supposed to. But now I don't know what to believe." His voice broke. "If Jesus is truly the Messiah, show me. I need to know. And I need to be sure." The room remained silent. David let out a slow breath, shaking his head. He had asked, but there was no answer. Typical. Frustrated, he went back to bed. He told himself he was done thinking about it. He would wake up, go to work, and push all of this out of his mind. But God had other plans. The next morning, David left the house early. He was still unsettled, still wrestling with his thoughts, but work was a good distraction. Numbers made sense. Markets were predictable. Faith? Not so much. As he pulled out of the driveway, his car sputtered. He frowned, pressing the gas, but instead of accelerating, the engine died completely. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, gripping the wheel. He tried turning the key. Nothing. Again. Nothing. David groaned, slamming his fist against the dashboard. He had no time for this. Then, without thinking, he whispered, "God, if you're listening, start the car." He turned the key one more time. The engine roared to life. David's breath caught in his throat. He stared at the dashboard, then at his hands gripping the steering wheel. His heart pounded. It was a coincidence. It had to be. Shaking off the feeling, he drove to work. But God wasn't done with him yet. Later that afternoon, David was rushing out of the office when someone called his name. "David Cohen?" He turned. An older man stood there, dressed neatly in a navy blue suit, a warm smile on his face. David frowned. The man looked familiar, but he couldn't place him. "Yes." The man extended a hand. "You don't remember me, do you?" David hesitated, then shook his hand. "Should I?" The man chuckled. "Probably not. But we met once, years ago. I was a client of your father's brokerage firm. Your name came up recently, and I just felt like I needed to speak to you." David raised an eyebrow. "About what?" The man's expression grew serious. "About Jesus." David felt like the ground had just shifted beneath him. What did you just say?" "I don't know why," the man admitted, "but I felt a strong urge to tell you that Jesus is the Messiah, that he loves you, that he's been pursuing you." David took a step back, his head spinning. "Did Ethan put you up to this?" The man looked confused. "Ethan? No. I don't even know an Ethan." David's mouth went dry. First the car. Now this. How many more signs did he need? His heart pounded as he whispered, almost to himself, "Oh my God, it's true." For the first time in his life, David Cohen knew that Jesus was real, and he could no longer fight it. That evening, he came home in a daze. Rachel was in the kitchen when he walked in, looking up in surprise. "You're home early." David didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped forward, took both of her hands in his, and whispered, "Rachel, I believe you." Tears welled up in her eyes. "David, I believe you," he said again, his voice breaking. "I believe Ethan. I believe Samuel. And most of all, I believe him." Rachel let out a choked sob, pulling him into a tight embrace. "Oh, David." They held each other for a long time, and for the first time in weeks, David felt peace. But there was still one more step. That Sunday morning, Rachel told him she was going to a gathering of believers, a mix of Jewish and Christian followers of Jesus. For the first time, David asked if he could come. The room was filled with warmth and joy, people worshiping in both Hebrew and English. David felt out of place at first, but as the service continued, something inside him stirred. Then, the pastor spoke. "There are some of you here today who have been running from the truth. You've been asking God for signs, and he's been showing you over and over again. But now, it's time. It's time to stop running. It's time to surrender." David's hands clenched at his sides. Then, the pastor asked, "If you know that Jesus is the Messiah, and you want to declare your faith in him, we invite you to be baptized today." David's heart pounded. He hadn't planned on this. He didn't even bring a change of clothes. But suddenly he knew. He had been given every sign he asked for. Every prayer had been answered. There was no more denying it. He turned to Rachel. "I need to do this." Tears streamed down her face. "Then go." David stepped forward. The pastor greeted him warmly, guiding him toward the water. "David, do you believe that Jesus is the Son of God and the Messiah of Israel?" "I do." "Then I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." The water was cold, But when David came up, he felt fire. Not literal flames like Rachel had seen, but a fire deep inside his soul. A cleansing, a transformation, a rebirth. As he stepped out of the water, Rachel rushed to embrace him, laughing and crying at the same time. David Cohen had spent his entire life resisting the truth, but now he was free.